If I thought taking this job would save my mother's life, I didn't know it might cost me my heart instead. The address on my phone led me to a gate taller than my apartment building. Iron, black, cold under the rain. I pressed my palm flat against it, like that would make it open faster, like I could will myself into a world that had never once let me in. My name is Iseul, 24 years old. No degree, no connections, no luck. Just a mother in a hospital bed and a stack of bills I couldn't read without my hands shaking. The job listing didn't even have a real title. Private security, live-in, pay triple anything I'd ever made folding shirts at a dry cleaner. I should have asked more questions. I didn't, because desperate people don't ask questions. We just say yes. A guard at the gate looked at me like I was something tracked in on someone's shoe. "You're late," he said. I wasn't. I checked my phone 3 times walking here, but I bowed my head anyway, because that's what you do when you need something more than you need your pride. Inside, the house didn't feel like a house. It felt like a museum that happened to have people living in it. Marble floors that swallowed sound. A staircase wide enough to fit my whole childhood street. I kept my eyes down, the way my mother taught me. "Yeah, don't stare at people like that," she used to say. "It makes them think you want something." I wanted a lot of things. I just needed them not to see it. "You're the new one." The voice came from above me, and I made the mistake of looking up. She stood at the top of the stairs like she'd been carved there. Dark hair, sharper eyes, a stillness in her face that didn't look like calm. It looked like something held down by force. She wore black, like it was armor, not fashion. "Iseul," I said, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me the way you'd look at a door you weren't sure should be locked or opened. My pulse did something stupid and fast, and I hated it immediately. "Iseul," she said finally, like the name itself was a warning. "You'll report to my wife." Not me, wife. The word landed strange in my chest, though I couldn't have told you why. "Hey, Won." Another voice, softer, came from the hallway behind her. A woman stepped into view. Gentler features, warmth where the other one had none, but something careful in the way she moved. Like warmth here had a cost too. "You're scaring her before she's even unpacked." "I'm not scared," I said, too fast. Haewon's mouth almost moved. Almost. "This is Yoonha," she said, "my wife. You'll answer to her directly. To me, only when it matters." I didn't understand yet what would count as mattering. I didn't understand a lot of things that first hour. Why the staff wouldn't meet my eyes. Why the guards flinched at certain names. Why my chest felt tight every time Haewon looked at me like she was deciding something about my life without telling me what. I just knew my mother's medication was due in 6 hours, and I had nowhere else to be. Yoonha smiled at me, soft, almost sorry. "Welcome to the house, Iseul." Haewon was already walking away. But at the bottom of the stairs she stopped, turned halfway, looked back at me, the way no employer ever should one. "Thing," she said quietly. "Don't fall in love with what you're protecting." I didn't know yet that it was already too late to listen. Haewon's footsteps faded down the hall, but the air she left behind didn't. It smelled like rain and something darker underneath. Cedar, maybe. Or smoke from a fire that had gone out hours ago. I stood there breathing it in like an idiot, like my lungs hadn't gotten the memo that she was my employer, not anything else. "Come on," Yoonha said, touching my elbow. "I'll show you where you're staying." Her hand was warm. That was the first thing I noticed. How warm it was against skin that had been cold from the rain for the last 20 minutes. The second thing I noticed was that she didn't let go right away, and I didn't pull back either. We walked down a hallway lined with photographs that all looked staged, smiling faces that didn't reach the eyes. Yoonha caught me looking. "Don't trust the pictures," she said, almost like a joke, except her voice didn't laugh. "What should I trust?" She glanced at me sideways. "Nothing yet. You just got here." My room was small compared to the rest of the house, but it had a bed, a window, a door that locked from the inside. After where I'd been sleeping the last 6 months, on my mother's couch so she could have the bed, it felt like a hotel in a movie. Hai-won doesn't usually come down to greet new staff, Yoonha said, lingering in the doorway. She did today. My heart did something uneven. Why? I don't know yet either. She said it lightly, but her eyes weren't light. They studied me a second too long, the way you'd study a stranger's face, trying to remember where you'd seen it before. You have a familiar look, Iseul. Has anyone ever told you that? Nobody had. Nobody who mattered, anyway. I shook my head, and she smiled like she didn't quite believe me, then left before I could ask what she meant. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my palm against my chest, trying to slow my own pulse down through sheer will. It didn't work. My skin still remembered her hand. My lungs still remembered Haewon's doorway, that scent of rain and smoke, the way she'd looked at me like I was a question she hadn't decided to answer yet. This is a job, I told myself. You're here for your mother, not for two women who look at you like that. I almost believed it. That's when I heard voices through the wall, low, careful, the kind of careful that means someone doesn't want to be overheard. I shouldn't have listened. I told myself that even as I was already standing, already moving closer to the wall, already holding my breath so my own heartbeat wouldn't give me away. The new girl, her file came back strange. A man's voice, one of the guards maybe. Strange how? Haewon. Flat, controlled. The kind of voice that made you stand straighter just hearing it through plaster. Her father, 9 years ago. The name connects to Cho Tae-sung's old territory. Silence. The kind that has weight to it, that presses against your ribs. Does she know? Haewon asked, quieter now. Doesn't look like it. My back hit the wall. My father's name, in this house, in these mouths. Like it belonged to them, and not to me. Cho Tae-sung. I knew that name. I'd grown up hearing it whispered in our apartment like a curse my mother refused to explain. Whatever this job was, it was never about a paycheck. And somewhere on the other side of that wall, the woman who'd told me not to fall in love with what I was protecting already knew exactly who I was. And she let me walk through that door anyway. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the unfamiliar bed, counting the cracks in the ceiling, listening for footsteps that never came, replaying the man's voice through the wall, over and over, until the words stopped making sense. Cho Tae-sung's old territory. My father's name sitting in a file, like evidence in a case nobody ever closed. By morning I told myself I'd misheard. People do that when the truth is too big to hold. I put on the uniform they'd given me. Plain black, no insignia. And I walked into the kitchen like a woman who hadn't spent the night falling apart. Hai-won was already there, drinking coffee like it owed her money. She didn't look up right away, and I used the second to study her face, searching for whatever guilt should have been written there. I found nothing, just stillness. The same stillness from the staircase, like she'd trained her own features into submission years ago. Sleep well? She asked, not looking up. Fine, I lied. You're a bad liar. Now she looked up, and her eyes did that thing again. That slow drag across my face like she was reading something I hadn't agreed to show her. I'm tired, that's all. She set the cup down. Yoonha wants you on the East Wing today. Cameras, perimeter checks, stay away from my office. Why? The question came out before I could stop it, sharper than I meant. Haewon's eyebrow lifted, just barely, like she found the nerve in me interesting instead of insubordinate. Because I said so, she said. That's usually enough for the people who work here. I'm not most people who work here. I don't know where that came from. Maybe the sleepless night. Maybe the name still burning behind my ribs. Haewon went quiet, and for a second, the air between us felt thinner, like the room itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what she'd do with that. No, she said finally, low. You're not. She walked past me close enough that I caught that scent again, rain and smoke, and my whole body betrayed me by leaning toward it instead of away. I hated how fast my pulse moved. I hated that some traitor part of me wanted her to stop walking. She didn't stop, but at the doorway she paused. Iseul. My name in her mouth sounded different than it had from anyone else. Heavier somehow. Whatever you think you heard last night, forget it. For your own sake. My stomach dropped through the floor. I didn't say I heard anything. You didn't have to. She finally turned, and her face had cracked open just enough for me to see something underneath the ice. Something that looked almost like fear, almost like guilt. Gone again, before I could be sure. Walls in this house are thin. People who listen at them don't usually get to keep listening for long. It wasn't a threat, it was worse than a threat. It sounded like a warning from someone who didn't want to be the one giving it. I should have backed down. Every survival instinct I had told me to bow my head, say yes, disappear into the wallpaper like I'd been taught my whole life. Instead, I held her gaze, and something in my chest dared her to look away first. She didn't. My father's name, I said, voice shaking but steady enough to be heard, was Han Jun-ho. Does that mean anything to you? The coffee cup in her hand didn't move. Her face didn't move. But something behind her eyes did. Something that flinched even while the rest of her stayed perfectly, terrifyingly still. It should mean nothing to me, she said. That's not a no. For one long second, neither of us breathed. Then footsteps echoed down the hall behind me. Fast, urgent. Yoonha's voice calling out something I couldn't process because Haewon's eyes had already given me the answer her mouth refused to. A door slammed somewhere upstairs, and Haewon whispered, almost too quiet to catch, "Get out of this house tonight, Iseul, before he finds out you're already here." Before he finds out you're already here. The words hadn't even settled in my chest before the house exploded into motion around me. Yoonha came around the corner at a near run, phone pressed to her ear, her usual softness gone, replaced by something sharp and fast and frightened. "Lock the east wing," she was saying. "Now he's 3 minutes out." "Who's 3 minutes out?" I asked. But nobody answered me. Haewon set the coffee cup down so hard it cracked against the counter, and the sound made me flinch worse than any shout could have. "Iseul, with me." Haewon's hand closed around my wrist, and there wasn't anything gentle in it, just urgency, just a grip that said move or get left behind. She pulled me down a hallway I hadn't seen yet, past a panel that slid open at her palm print, like something out of a film I'd never believed was real. "What is this?" "Safe room. Get in." "I'm not hiding while you tell me nothing. You're hiding," she said, voice cracking for the first time since I'd met her. "Because if Taesong sees your face in this house, he will know exactly who you are, and I am not ready to lose another person because of what I didn't tell them in time. Another person." The words landed strange and heavy, but there wasn't time to ask what she meant. She pushed me through the door, and for 1 second her hand stayed against my back. Warm, trembling slightly, in a way I don't think she meant for me to feel. Yoonha slipped in behind us a moment later, breathless, her hair falling loose from its pins. The door sealed shut with a sound like a held breath finally letting go. The room was small, steel walls, a single dim light, the three of us closer together than any of us had planned to be. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, fast and uneven, and underneath it, footsteps somewhere far above, muffled voices, a door slamming hard enough to vibrate through the floor. "Talk to me," I whispered. "Please. Who is he?" Yoonha and Haewon exchanged a look I couldn't read. One of those silent conversations married people have, full of history I wasn't part of. "Cho Tae-sung," Haewon said finally, low. "He believes this family owes him a debt that was never paid. He believes your father's death settled half of it, and the other half?" Silence stretched long enough that I heard my own pulse counting the seconds. "You," Yoonha said softly. "He believes you're owed to him too." The floor seemed to tilt under me. I pressed my back against the cold steel wall, trying to remember how to breathe normally, trying not to let them see how badly my hands were shaking. Haewon noticed anyway. She always noticed. I was starting to learn, even when she pretended not to. She crossed the small space and, without asking, took my hand in both of hers. Her skin was warm despite everything, despite the ice she wore like armor everywhere else. "You're safe in this room," she said. "I promise you that much." "You don't make promises," Yunha murmured, almost to herself, like she was surprised to hear it. "I do now," Haewon said, not looking away from me. Something about the way she said it cracked something loose in my chest. Something I'd been holding on to since the staircase, since the rain, since the moment she told me not to fall in love with what I was protecting. I wanted to ask her why she cared. I wanted to ask why her hands hadn't let go of mine yet. Footsteps stopped right outside the steel door. All three of us went still. Yunha's hand found my shoulder. Haewon's grip on my fingers tightened until it almost hurt. A man's voice, calm, amused, close enough that the steel barely muffled it at all. "Haewon," he said, like greeting an old friend. "I know you have something of mine in there." Something of mine, like I was an object he'd misplaced, not a person who'd spent 24 years breathing without his permission. Nobody moved. The three of us stood locked in that steel room, like the air itself had gone solid. Haewon's fingers still wrapped around mine. Yunha's hand pressing into my shoulder, with a steadiness that told me she was terrified and refusing to show it. I understood that. I'd spent most of my life doing the same thing. "He can't get through that door," Yunha whispered, barely sound at all. "It's reinforced. He knows that." "Then why is he still standing there?" I breathed back. Neither of them answered, which was its own kind of answer. Taesung's voice came again, still calm, still almost pleasant, the kind of voice that had clearly never needed to shout to make people afraid. "I didn't come to fight, Haewon. I came to remind you that debts don't disappear because you ignore them. They compound." Haewon's jaw tightened. I watched the muscle there flex once, twice, like she was physically chewing back everything she wanted to say. "How did he know I was here?" I asked, low. Haewon's eyes moved to mine slowly, too slowly. "Someone told him," Yunha said, soft, careful, like she was breaking something fragile. "Who?" My voice came out steady, which surprised me, because nothing inside me was. Another silence. That silent married conversation again, full of things I wasn't supposed to hear. This time I wasn't willing to let it go. "Who told him I was here?" Yunha's hand fell from my shoulder. She moved to the small screen mounted beside the door, pulling up the security feed, her back turned to me in a way that felt deliberate. Haewon finally released my hand, and the absence of her warmth hit me harder than I expected, like stepping from inside to cold in a single step. "There's a person in this house," Haewon said slowly, "who has been feeding information to Taesung for longer than I want to admit. You knew you had a leak, and you still let me walk in here. I didn't know it was active. I thought—" She stopped. Something moved across her face, sharp and private, and gone before I could name it. "I thought I'd handled it." "Handled it," I repeated. "My life was the thing you were handling." Yes, no hesitation, no apology in her voice. Just the flat, terrible honesty of someone who'd made a decision and was still carrying it. And I was wrong. Coming from Haewon, those 3 words felt like a building coming down. Yunha turned from the screen, and her eyes were wet in a way she was clearly fighting. "Iseul," she said, "your father didn't just owe Taesung money. He was protecting someone when he died. Someone inside this family." The room dropped 10 degrees. "What are you saying?" "He was protecting me," Yunha whispered. "He worked for my family before the marriage, before any of this. And when Taesung came for me 9 years ago, your father stood between us." My ears were ringing. The whole story I'd built about my father's death, the one with no faces in it, just absence, just an empty chair at every meal, just my mother's silence on the anniversary every year. It was crumbling into a shape I didn't recognize. "He died for you," I said, and my voice broke clean down the middle, And you never told me. You never came. I didn't know who you were until 2 days ago. Tears finally broke through, quiet and devastating on her face. When your file came through, I recognized his name, and I panicked, and I called you in instead of away, because I thought if I could keep you close, I could keep you safe this time. Outside the door, Taesung's footsteps began moving again, slow and deliberate, fading down the hall. Not leaving, circling. The security screen flickered, and Yoonha made a sound like she'd been struck. The East Gate camera is down, she said. Hwon spun toward the screen. Every guard that should have been posted on the south perimeter was gone. He didn't come alone, Hwon said. Then the lights went out. And the only thing standing between us and whatever was coming through that gate was the dark. For exactly 2 seconds, nobody moved. Then Haewon's hand found my arm in the blackness, sure and immediate, like she'd already mapped the distance between us before the lights died. That terrified me more than the dark itself. People only move that fast towards someone when they've already decided they won't leave them behind. Stay close, she said. Her voice was different in the dark, stripped of the marble and the silence and the armor. Just a voice. Just a woman who sounded like she was fighting to keep something from breaking. There's a secondary exit, Yoonha said somewhere to my left, hands already moving along the wall. Behind the panel, it opens manually from inside. Where does it lead? I asked. The garage, then out through the east service road. A soft click, the sound of a panel giving way. If his people are on the south perimeter, they won't be covering the east yet. We move now. I should have felt fear. I did feel fear. But underneath it, something else was burning. Something that felt like the first real thing I'd felt in years. My father stood in a room like this once. Maybe not this room, but something like it. Small and dark and dangerous. And he'd chosen to stand between a woman and the man hunting her. He died for that choice. I wasn't going to waste it by falling apart. Move, I said. I'll take the rear. Hae-Swan's grip on my arm tightened. You're not. I'm the bodyguard, I said. This is literally the job. A breath. Then she let go, and I felt the loss of her hand like a small wound. We moved through the passage single file, Yoonha leading, Hae-Swan between us, me behind. The tunnel was narrow and cold. Concrete walls that wept moisture. The sound of our footsteps swallowed immediately by the dark. Somewhere above us, through the ceiling, came the muffled sounds of the house being moved through. Not ransacked, not chaotic, methodical, room by room. Someone who knew the layout. How many does he usually bring? I whispered, enough, Haemon said. The tunnel opened into the garage through a door disguised as a utility shelf. Yoonha pushed it aside, and we spilled out between 2 black vehicles, crouching, the garage cold and smelling of oil and metal. A thin line of exterior light bled under the roll door. Yoonha found the manual release. She pulled. The door rose 6 inches, enough to see the service road outside, empty, dark, the tree line 20 meters away. Now, Haewon said. We went, one at a time, low, fast, across the open stretch of concrete and onto the gravel road. The cold hit me like a wall. Rain had started again, light but relentless. The kind that soaks you before you realize it's happening. I counted steps, 12 to the tree line, 8, 4. We hit the trees together, breathing hard, pressing ourselves into the shadow. That's when Yoonha grabbed my wrist, and her grip was nothing like Haewon's. It was shaking. Iseul, she said, barely a whisper. I need you to know something. Before anything else happens tonight, I need you to know. Not now, Haewon said, sharp. Yes, now. Yoonha's eyes found mine in the dark, wet from rain or something else. Your father made me promise. That day, 9 years ago, the last thing he said was that if anything happened to him, someone had to find you, had to make sure you were kept away from this world. Her voice fractured. I broke that promise the moment I let your file through. I told myself it was to protect you, but Iseul, I think part of me just needed. A twig snapped somewhere behind us. Close. Too close. All three of us went still. I turned slowly, scanning the dark between the trees, and my blood went cold. A figure stood at the tree line, 10 feet back, patient and unmoving, like they'd been there the whole time. And behind them, 3 more. One stepped in front of me, arms spread, and the gesture cracked something open in my chest that I had no name for yet. "Run," she said, but her feet didn't move. Her feet didn't move, and neither did mine, because some things you don't run from, you run toward. I stepped up beside Haewon, shoulder to shoulder, close enough to feel the tension radiating off her body, like heat from a fire that had been burning long before I arrived. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see me in her peripheral vision, and for one fraction of a second her composure cracked wide open. "I said run," she repeated, low and furious. "I heard you," I said. I chose not to. The figure at the tree line stepped forward, and the rain-filtered moonlight caught his face. Cho Tae-sung looked nothing like the monster I'd built in my head, over 24 years of a father-shaped silence. He looked ordinary. Middle-aged, well-dressed, the kind of calm that lives on the other side of having hurt enough people to stop feeling it. "Hae Wong," he said pleasantly. "You've always been dramatic, and you've always been a coward," she said. 4 men to collect 1 girl. 3 women, he corrected, eyes moving past her to me. They stayed there. Something in his gaze when he looked at me wasn't anger or hunger. It was recognition, and that was worse. "She has her father's eyes." I wondered if she would. My stomach turned over hard. "You don't get to talk about him," I said. "He was brave," Tae-sung said, almost gently. "Brave and foolish, which is really just a slower way of dying." He tilted his head. "You should have stayed invisible, Han Iseul. You were safe as long as you were nothing." "She's not nothing." Yoonha's voice came from my right, quiet and absolute. She moved to my other side, completing a line of 3, and I felt the shift in the air, felt all of us pull into alignment, like something that had always been meant to stand this way. She has never been nothing. Her father made sure of that by giving everything he had. Taesung's pleasantness slipped, just slightly. "You're going to give me the girl, Yoonha, or I'm going to take everything you've spent 7 years building. Your empire, your marriage, your name. Everything we've built," Haewon said, cold and absolute, "was built knowing this conversation would come eventually." "We're not surprised, Taesung. We're ready." She was lying. I knew she was lying because her hand had found mine behind our backs, hidden from him, gripping like something she was afraid of losing in the dark. But her voice didn't betray a single thread of it, and I understood in that moment exactly how she'd survived this world as long as she had. 2 of Taesung's men moved to flank us. I tracked them the way I'd been trained, watching feet not faces, waiting for the shift of weight that meant moving. My pulse was fast but clear. The fear was there, underneath everything, but it wasn't running me. My father stood in something like this, I kept thinking. And he chose the person beside him over himself. I finally understood why. "Last chance," Taesung said. "No," said all 3 of us. And it wasn't planned. It wasn't coordinated. It just came out of us like one breath. And something about it made Taesung go very still. Then everything happened fast. The 2 flanking men lunged. I moved before thinking, muscle memory and desperation fusing into something clean, catching the first one's momentum and redirecting it hard into the second, the impact cracking through my shoulder like electricity. Haewon was already moving, fluid and precise, nothing wasted in the way she fought. Like violence was a language she'd gone fluent in young, and spent years trying to forget. We were holding, barely. Then Taesung did something I didn't expect. He stepped back, he smiled, and he reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, producing not a weapon but a phone, turning the screen toward us. On it was a live feed, a hospital room, white walls, a bed. A woman I recognized even through the small screen, even through the terrible stillness of her, even though I hadn't let myself picture her face all day, because it made it harder to be brave. My mother. "I don't need you to fight me," Taesong said quietly. "I just needed you to come out of the trees." My legs stopped working. "Iseul?" Haewon's voice came from somewhere far away. "Iseul, don't." But he was already dialing. And every survival instinct I had dissolved into the single most primal thing I've ever felt. The need to keep my mother breathing. "Stop." The word tore out of me raw and ugly. "Stop. Don't touch her." Taesong's thumb hovered over the screen. He wasn't even looking at me directly, which was the cruelest part. Like I was an inconvenience being managed, not a person making a choice. "Come with me willingly," he said, "and she gets the best care money provides. Fight me, and the man I have in that room stops being patient." "There's someone in her room." My voice came out hollow. "Right now. There's someone already in there." "There has been since this morning," he said. "Since the moment your file crossed my desk." The trees, the rain, the dark, all of it narrowed down to that small screen and my mother's motionless shape under a white blanket. She didn't know. She was lying there trusting that the world outside her room was the ordinary kind of dangerous, the kind she'd already survived. Haewon stepped toward me and Taesong's eyes snapped to her, sharp for the first time. "Don't," he said. One word, flat and final. She stopped, but her hand found the back of my jacket, fingers curling into the fabric, and the grip said everything she wasn't allowed to say out loud. "Let me go with him," I said quietly. Her grip tightened to the point of pain. "No. Haewon. No." Her voice fractured down the middle on that single syllable, and the sound of it undid me more than any of the fear had. The ice cracked completely, and what came through wasn't rage. It was desperation. Raw, helpless, human desperation, from a woman who had built her entire life around never being helpless. "I will not watch another person walk away from me into him. I will not." Another person. She'd said it before, in the safe room. I'd filed it away for later, and later had arrived. "Who was the first person?" I asked. Even now, even in the middle of all of it, something moved across her face. Grief so old it had gone quiet. "My sister," she said. 10 years ago, he made the same offer. She went willingly to protect me, a breath that shook from her core. She didn't come back. The rain kept falling. Taesong watched this exchange with the patience of a man who'd seen leverage work before, and was simply waiting for it to finish working now. "I'm not your sister," I said to Haewon. "I know who you are," she said, and the way she said it made my chest feel too small for everything inside it. Yoonha appeared at my other side, close, her shoulder pressing into mine with quiet, solid warmth. "We have a plan," she murmured, barely moving her lips. Haewon made calls while Taesong was still walking the perimeter. "We just need 4 more minutes. 4 minutes is too long if someone is standing next to my mother's bed." "I know," her eyes held mine steady. "Trust us." Trust. The most dangerous word in this house from the moment I arrived. The thing I'd been withholding since the wall, since my father's name, since every silence they'd wrapped around a truth I deserved. And yet, I looked at Haewon, whose hand still hadn't released my jacket. I looked at Yoonha, whose father's bodyguard had been my father, whose life his death had purchased. I thought about the man who'd raised me on silences and absence, and love that had no words, because he spent all his words keeping someone else safe. Maybe trust wasn't something you decided. Maybe it was something that happened to you whether you chose it or not. 3 minutes, I said to Yoonha. Then I turned to Taesong and did the last thing anyone in those trees expected. I stepped forward, away from Haewon's grip, toward him. "Okay," I said. "I'll come." Haewon made a sound behind me like something breaking. Taesong smiled and lowered the phone. And the moment he looked down at the screen to make his call, Yoonha moved. But so did someone else. From the opposite tree line. Someone who wasn't Taesung's man. Someone who stopped and looked directly at me with my father's face wearing a stranger's age. Someone who stopped and looked directly at me with my father's face wearing a stranger's age. And the whole world went silent inside my head. Not silent like peace. Silent like the moment before something irreversible. He was older than any photograph I owned. Hair threaded with grey, a scar along his jaw I didn't recognize, eyes that were mine and not mine at the same time. He stood at the edge of the tree line with the stillness of someone who had spent years practicing invisibility and was only now choosing to stop. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. Taesung turned at the movement, and for the first time all night, the pleasantness left his face completely. What replaced it was something older and uglier. Fear dressed up as fury. "That's not possible," he said. "Hello, Taesung," my father's voice. I knew it from a place deeper than memory. From the part of me that had been waiting for it since I was 15 years old, standing at an empty grave. "You should have made sure. 9 years ago." Everything happened in the space of one breath. Yoonha moved first. The signal she'd been waiting for. Phone to her ear. And from the south perimeter came headlights. 3 vehicles. Haewon's people flooding the tree line with light and numbers. Taesung's men scattered. 2 were taken down before they cleared 10 feet. The man holding leverage over my mother's hospital room would find, I learned later, that the call he was waiting for never came, because Haewon had gotten there first, because 4 minutes was exactly how long it took to make sure my mother had her own protection before any of this played out. Taesung ran. He actually ran, which was almost funny. A man who'd spent a decade collecting debts from dead men, running through wet grass in an expensive suit. He made it 6 steps before Haewon was in front of him, and I will never forget the look on her face in that moment. Not rage, not triumph. Something colder and more final than either. "My sister's name," she said, "was Ju Soo-jin." "Say it." He said nothing. She let him go, stepped back, and the 2 men behind her handled the rest. Then there was quiet. Just rain and headlights and my own breathing, too loud in my ears. And my father walked toward me across the wet grass. I didn't run to him. I stood completely still because I was genuinely unsure my legs would carry me, and I refused to fall. He stopped 2 feet away and looked at me the way you look at someone you have memorized from a distance for years, checking the real thing against the version you kept in your head. "Iseul, he said. That undid me. Not the name. The way he said it. The same way my mother said it. The same weight. The same specific tenderness that belonged only to people who had loved me before I could remember being loved. I didn't cry. I pressed both hands against his chest to make sure he was solid, that he was real, that this wasn't something my mind had manufactured from shock and rain and wanting. He was solid. He was warm. He put his hands over mine and held them there. "I have so many questions," I said. My voice sounded like gravel. "I know. I'll answer all of them." His eyes moved over my shoulder, briefly, to where Haewon and Yoonha stood at a distance, giving us space they didn't have to give. Something passed through his expression I couldn't read. "They kept you safe." "They did," I said. And then, because it was true, and I was done performing otherwise, "I think I'm in love with them." My father looked at me for a long moment, then something in his face softened into something almost like a smile. "I know," he said. "That's what I was afraid of." "Why?" He opened his mouth, and I watched his expression shift from warmth into something serious and careful and heavy with meaning he hadn't given me yet. "Because they haven't told you everything," he said, "and what they're still hiding, Iseul. It changes all of it." Behind me, Haewon's voice came quiet and close, closer than I expected, like she'd been listening. "She deserves to know," Haewon said. "Not to me, to my father." Silence. Then the sound of Yoonha's breath catching. "Haewon," Yoonha said, low and warning. "Not here. Not yet." "Yes, here," Haewon said. Tonight, my father's hands tightened over mine, and the secret that had survived 9 years, a staged death, a mafia war, and 2 women's silence finally broke the surface. I just didn't know yet if I was ready to survive what it was.